There is a kind of exhaustion that words can never fully hold. It's not the loud grief that people can see. It's not even the obvious loneliness that others might notice. It's something lighter, almost invisible, like standing in the middle of a crowd, yet feeling completely unseen. Not because people aren't near you, but because no one is truly present with you. They hear your voice, but they don't hear you. You sit in rooms filled with conversation, laughter, and endless words, yet none of it touches that hidden place inside you that longs to be recognized. And quietly, almost without realizing, you begin to pull back. Not out of bitterness, but because you're tired. Tired of offering parts of yourself to people who only know how. You've spent years reshaping yourself to fit into spaces that were never built for your soul. You learned to soften your truth, to dim your light, to shrink your voice so others could feel more comfortable. You thought maybe if you could just be less, you'd finally be enough for them. But the more you diminished yourself, the more invisible you became. Not only to them, but to your own age. And then one day, without warning, the silence starts to shift. Not the silence around you, but the one within. You stop filling empty spaces with words that feel hollow. You stop laughing at jokes that no longer hold meaning. You stop pretending that everything is fine just to keep the peace. In that quiet, something ancient awakens inside you. A voice you forgot existed. Small at first, like this voice was never gone. It was only hidden beneath years of compromise. And now, as you stop performing, you begin to hear it again. It feels unfamiliar and yet deeply known. It carries your truth, the one you abandoned in exchange for belonging, the one you dimmed for fear of being too much. Now it returns, and everything begins to chant. At first, you don't even notice the unraveling. It's quiet, like fog slowly creeping into a room you once knew so well. Nothing crashes, nothing breaks, but piece by piece, something inside you dissolves. You speak less, not because you've run out of things to say, but because you no longer feel the need to fill the silence for others. You no longer feel the urge to explain, to justify, to soften your truth into something more digestible. You begin to realize that many of the people around you never truly listened. They only waited for their turn to speak. And so you stop. You stop explaining your boundaries to those who never intended to honor them. You stop watering down your honesty for people who mistake your clarity for cruelty. You stop shrinking your needs to make others feel bigger. Without these performances, you watch as your old identity starts to fall away. The identity you wore like armor. The one who was always available. The one who fixed, who soothed, who said yes when you wanted to say no. The one who bent and folded to fit into the emptiness of others. And with each layer you release, people begin to vanish. Not in anger, not even in conflict. They simply slip away as if a season quietly changed and no one announced its arrival. You might blame yourself at first. Maybe you've become too distant. Maybe you're asking for too much. But beneath that doubt, something else stirs. A knowing, a remembering. This remembering feels like grief. Not for the people leaving, but for the parts of yourself you silenced for so long. The instincts you questioned, the fire you smothered, the intuition you abandoned because someone once said you were too sensitive, too intense, too much. Now, that grief becomes your teacher. It shows you how much of your life was built on keeping others comfortable while you carried the discomfort alone. It shows you how often your silence was mistaken for agreement, how many times your self-erasure was applauded as kindness. And finally, you ask yourself the question you had long avoided. How much of who I thought I was just survival? At first, it feels like loneliness. The quiet stretches longer. The rooms feel colder. The spaces once filled with familiar faces now echo with absence. And in that emptiness, doubt tries to creep in. It whispers that you've made a mistake, that maybe you should have held on tighter, compromised more, stayed a little smaller to keep the comfort of company. But something deeper inside you resists, because as the silence grows, so does your awareness. You start to notice something you never quite understood before. Loneliness and liberation can look almost identical. Both are quiet. Both are still. Both carry the weight of emptiness, but they are not the same. Loneliness tells you that you are alone because you are unworthy, because you failed at being who others needed you to be. It wraps itself around your heart like a heavy fog, convincing you that this emptiness is punishment. But liberation whispers a different story. It tells you that you are alone because you have finally stopped performing, because you have chosen truth over comfort, authenticity over approval, because you are no longer bending to be accepted. Liberation carries a strange kind of lightness. It doesn't erase the ache entirely, but it transforms it. The emptiness no longer feels like punishment. It feels like spaciousness, like room to finally breathe, like clearing away the cluttered noise to hear something purer within yourself. And once you taste that breath of freedom, you realize how heavy the pretending once was, how exhausting it was to be liked for versions of yourself that weren't fully real, how painful it was to edit your soul for the sake of belonging. The ache that remains now is not the ache of abandonment. It's the ache of returning to yourself, of shedding skins that never fit, of stepping into rooms that echo with your own voice, steady and clear. And you begin to see the difference. Loneliness is the absence of others. Liberation is the arrival of you. This is where most people turn back. The silence grows louder. The emptiness feels endless. You find yourself sitting in a space between who you used to be and who you are becoming, and there is no map for this territory. It's uncomfortable because there's nothing left to chase, no one left to please, no applause to fill the air. The urge to reach back is strong, to call someone, to explain yourself one more time, to try and make them understand why you've changed. But you don't. You sit in the ache, in the stretch of days where nothing seems to move, where the world feels indifferent to your becoming. This is the test. Can you remain here without filling the void with old patterns? Can you resist the temptation to run back into the familiar arms of people who only loved the version of you that served them? Can you trust the emptiness long enough to allow something new to rise? Because if you can, something rare begins to grow. Not louder thoughts, not forced confidence, but a deeper knowing. You begin to see what you couldn't before. How little people truly listen. How many conversations are performances, not connections. How often people gather for comfort, not for truth. You see the transactions disguised as friendships, the agreements that kept peace while starving your spirit. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. It hurts, but it also frees you. The pain no longer comes from being left out, but from realizing how much you once settled for. You grieve again, not for what you've lost, but for how long you stayed where you were never fully seen. But now in this stillness, you make peace with solitude, not as punishment, but as preparation. You begin to understand what few dare to know, that the real work of becoming happens in the spaces where no one is watching. The quiet has become your teacher, and you are learning. You used to wear so many masks, not because you were dishonest, but because the world taught you that being fully yourself was dangerous. That softness would be mistaken for weakness. That honesty would be called rude. That depth would be labeled dramatic. So you learn to adjust to perform, to become whatever made others more comfortable. But masks are heavy. Each one added another layer of distance between you and yourself. Each one muted your voice just a little more. And after years of wearing them, you forgot where the mask ended and where you began. Now, as you sit in the quiet, those masks start to crumble. You no longer laugh when it's not funny. You no longer nod in agreement to avoid conflict. You no longer stay silent to keep the peace that was never real. You say no without apologizing. You ask questions that others avoid. You choose solitude over shallow company. And people notice. Some pull away quietly. Some criticize you for changing. Some accuse you of becoming distant, cold, or difficult. But you see it now, they were never loving you. They were loving the version of you that served their comfort. The world resists clarity. Your clarity disrupts the fog others live in. It forces them to confront truths they've spent years avoiding. It ruins the unspoken agreements that kept dysfunction alive. And because you are no longer willing to play the game, they exit. But you do not chase. Because what falls away now was never meant to stay. The people who leave are not your loss. They are the shedding of what no longer aligns with who you are becoming. And as the masks die, something else is born. You. Not the version others shaped, not the one who bent to survive, but the one who was always there beneath the layers. The one who remembers what freedom feels like. The one who can finally breathe. There is a strange place you arrive at once the masks fall, but before new life fully begins. A middle ground that few speak of, because most never dare to stay here long enough to understand it. It is neither the comfort of the familiar nor the arrival of the new. It is the hollow in between. And it tests you in ways nothing else can. Here, there are no clear answers. The people who used to orbit your light have faded. The new souls who might one day arrive have not yet appeared. You are left alone with yourself. Fully, unavoidably, completely. And this is where many run back. Not because they are weak, but because being unseen feels unbearable. They crave the noise, the chatter, the distractions, anything to avoid the sharp stillness of their own presence. But you remain, not because you enjoy the loneliness, but because you've come to recognize its purpose. You feel the ache, but you do not flee from it. You sit in the fire knowing that this burning is not destruction, but refinement. This is the crucible of becoming. Old patterns pull at you like ghosts. The temptation to explain yourself, to win back old connections, to prove your worth, it all rises. But now you see it for what it is, the desperate voice of the version of you that once feared abandonment. and you let it pass. In this space, you begin to generate something different. Not the need to be accepted, but the ability to stand rooted in your own truth even when no one else affirms it. Your mind grows quieter. Your breathing deepens. You no longer chase relationships to fill your emptiness. You recognize that most of what you once called connection was survival wrapped in ritual. And as you stay, something rare begins to emerge. A grounded presence, a steady inner current, the ability to sit in silence without drowning in it. You start to understand why few ever cross this threshold. Because here, you do not build strength through validation. You build it through surrender. You are not waiting for life to happen anymore. You are becoming life itself. There comes a shift almost imperceptible at first. The silence that once felt heavy begins to feel different. Not lighter, but deeper. It no longer presses on your chest like a weight. Instead, it opens inside you like a vast, quiet field. You realize this silence is not empty. It is full of memory, of breath of the faint but steady pulse of your own being. You begin to hear things you once drowned out with noise. The steady rhythm of your heart, the low hum of your own intuition, the quiet courage that rises not from being heard, but from hearing yourself. And you listen. You listen to the grief that still lingers in the corners of your soul, not to be consumed by it, but to honor it. You listen to the dreams you once set aside in favor of belonging, not to chase them frantically, but to welcome them home. Silence becomes your sanctuary. You stop looking for exits. You stop planning your escape. You sit, you stay, you breathe. And in that stillness, you find something you didn't know you were missing yourself. Not the self shaped by expectation or fear. Not the self conditioned by approval or rejection, but the self that simply is. Untouched, undiminished, unapologetic. This kind of solitude doesn't isolate you. It roots you. It teaches you that presence isn't about proximity to others. It's about intimacy with yourself. And in learning to be with yourself, you discover a profound truth. You were never truly abandoned. You simply abandoned the parts of you that didn't fit into the life you thought you had to live. Now you are returning, not to the world, not to the crowd, but to your own skin, your own breath, your own quiet, sacred center. And for the first time in a long time, you are home. And then, almost without warning, something begins to shift around you. Not everyone disappeared. A few souls start to arrive quietly, gently, without demand or performance. They don't rush to fill your silences. They don't require you to shrink or explain. They sit with you not because they need you to be someone else, but because they simply wish to be near what is real. They carry their own quiet, their own depth. They've sat in their own silences too. You recognize them instantly, not by their words, but by the way their presence feels safe, steady, unthreatening. There is no transaction here, no unspoken contract to be managed. Just two beings sharing space without trying to control its shape. And this is how you learn that not all company is created equal. You no longer crave the crowd. You no longer hunger for surface-level noise disguised as connection. You desire only what resonates, what breathes with you, rather than drains you. What honors both your silence and your voice. The desperation you once carried to be chosen, to be included, to belong, has dissolved. In its place stands a calm certainty you belong wherever your soul feels at peace. And if that is in the company of few, or even alone, so be it. This is not isolation. This is sovereignty. You no longer search for validation in the reactions of others. You don't measure your worth by how many stay or how many leave. You've outgrown the need to perform love. You have become love, steady, grounded, and whole. And now, as these few souls enter your orbit, you welcome them, not because you need them, but because you recognize them. Kindred spirits who have also made peace with their own silence. And together, without effort, without fear, you simply exist, free, unburdened, and finally seen, not because you change to be seen, but because you remain true long enough for truth to find you. There's a revolution happening inside you, though it makes no sound. It doesn't announce itself with grand declarations or visible milestones. It unfolds slowly, like the steady unfurling of a flower, untouched by hurried hands. And though few can see it, you feel its weight, its depth, its quiet power. You no longer fight to be understood. You no longer beg for someone to see your worth. You've stopped defending your needs to people unwilling to hold them. The exhausting dance of proving has ended. You simply are. And in that being, you carry something most have never known: peace that doesn't require permission. You've discovered that healing was never about fixing every broken piece. It was about releasing what was never yours to carry. It was about laying down the expectations, the roles, the guilt, the pressure, and allowing yourself to be enough exactly as you are. You watch as others continue their frantic performances, chasing applause, approval, connection that costs them their soul. But you no longer feel the pull to join them. Not because you are better, but because you are done bleeding for belonging. You have made peace with your own enoughness, and in that peace, you've become something unshakable, not cold, not distant, but clear. Clear in your boundaries, clear in your values, clear in your willingness to walk away from anything that asks you to betray yourself again. The world may misinterpret this. They may call you detached, hard, unapproachable. But you understand now they have only ever known love as sacrifice, attention, as currency, presence, as performance. They don't recognize freedom when it sits quietly before them. But you do, because you've earned it in the silent nights, in the lonely spaces, in the sacred unraveling where you met yourself fully. And now, nothing and no one can take that from you. You are no longer waiting for someone to choose you. You have already chosen yourself. And finally, you arrive, not at some grand destination, not at the version of yourself you once dreamed of becoming, but back here to where you were always meant to be, home inside your own skin. The journey was never about becoming someone new. It was about stripping away everything you were never meant to carry. The masks, the roles, the compromises, the desperate reaching for love that required you to abandon yourself, all of it slowly falls away. What remains is simple, quiet, whole. You sit in your own presence, and it no longer feels empty. The silence that once screamed now hums with a steady rhythm. You feel your breath. You feel your weight. You feel your existence no longer something to apologize for, but something to honor. You've outgrown the version of you that feared being alone. Now, you welcome solitude like an old friend. It holds you not in punishment, but in partnership. You no longer chase conversations that leave you hollow. You no longer reach for people who only love the echo of your compliance. You no longer sacrifice truth for company. And because you have chosen yourself, the world responds differently. Not with applause, not with crowds, but with something far more sacred: alignment. The people who now enter your life don't come to complete you. They come to reflect the wholeness you've already claimed. They sit with you, not to fill your silence, but to share in it. They don't demand your energy. They honor it. And when you look at them, you recognize something familiar. They too have walked through the fire. They too have surrendered to the quiet. They too have come home to themselves. There is no longer a need to be seen. You are seen fully by the only eyes that ever truly mattered: your own. And in this sacred stillness, you realize the great paradox. You were never lost. You were simply being cleared. You were never unlovable. You were learning how to love without losing yourself. You were never broken. You were becoming, and now you are.